Hey, Algebra 1B, welcome to week 4. This week we are doing linear functions, specifically graphing lines. So we're going to review how to graph lines and remember slope-intercept form. That's going to be the main form we look at this week. All right, so here we go. Slope-intercept form. Remember, we have two main parts to slope-intercept form, which I guess you can probably guess what they are, the slope and the intercept. And remember, your slope is represented by the m, the number in front of x, and the intercept is represented by b, the number by itself, or we also call this the constant. So the number by itself, the constant, is your y-intercept, where it crosses the y-axis, and then the slope in front of x is telling us rise over run. It's going to tell us how the line is going. So the first thing I want to practice is just writing an equation in slope-intercept form. So if they give you the slope, like over here, they told us that the slope m is -2/3, and b, the y-intercept, is -5. If I want to write this, I'm just following this pattern. Y equals, well, they told us m, the slope, is -2/3 times x plus b, which is -5. Now, you could also write this as -2/3 x minus 5. Either way, same thing. All right. Now, what if, though, they give us the line in what's called standard form? Remember, standard form is this right here, a times x plus b times y equals c. The problem here is I cannot see the slope and the y-intercept very clearly. I need to turn it into slope-intercept form in order to make that happen. Notice in slope-intercept form, it's solved for y. Y is by itself. And so that's what I want to do here. If the question is asking me to rearrange and to identify the slope and the y-intercept, my goal is to get y by itself, to move everything away from y. The first thing you're going to move every single time is the term with x. Now, the term with x here is a positive 3x. Now, there is a negative here, but that negative goes with that too. So be very careful. This is a positive 3x. If I want to move it, I'm going to subtract it. I'm going to do the opposite. And remember, the equal sign divides the two halves. Whatever I do to the left side of the equal sign, I also have to do to the right. That's going to leave me with a -2y on the left equals. Now, I have 14 and a -3x. Those are not like terms. I cannot combine them. However, I would like to put the term with x first, just so it looks like this, mx plus b. So I'm going to put the -3x first and then the plus 14. Now we're almost there. Y is almost by itself. So the other thing we need to do is, well, y is being multiplied by -2. So to undo that, I need to divide by -2. However, again, if I divide this side by -2, everything on this side also needs to be divided by -2. So that means this does, as does this. So on the left side, those cancel out, and I'm left with y, which was my goal, so that's good. Then I have -3 over -2. Well, a negative divided by a negative is just a positive, so the negatives cancel each other out. But 3 over 2, since that's not divisible, I'm just going to leave it as a fraction and put the x after it. That's my slope. My slope is 3 over 2. 14 divided by -2. Well, I can do that. 14 divided by -2, that's a -7. And now we have it in this form. Now, I haven't answered the question. I moved it. I rearranged it to slope-intercept. That I did. But I answer the question, I have to identify the slope, which I look for the x term, and the number in front of x, 3 over 2, that is the slope. And then the intercept, that's going to be -7. So notice, in order to rearrange from standard to slope-intercept, there's two steps. Number one, you move the x term, either adding or subtracting it, doing the opposite of whatever it is. So since it's a positive 3x, we subtracted it from both sides. Then the second step is going to be to divide away whatever is in front of y, and we got to make sure everything gets divided by that number, and then you should have y by itself. Okay, so let's recap a little bit, and let's talk a little bit about slope before we get to actually graphing these. So to put the equation in y equals mx plus b form, that's going to be our first step. That's what we just talked about. Sometimes it will already be in y equals mx plus b form, and if that's the case, then we can identify the slope, we can identify the y-intercept, and we can graph it. But if it's not, we're going to have to do the steps we just talked about, move the constant, and then divide everything by the number in front of y so that it looks like this. Now, when you're graphing, you're always going to start with a y-intercept. You're always going to start with this number. That's where it crosses the y-axis. Remember, on your graph, x is this way, y is this way. So whatever b is, that's where it crosses this line right here. That's your starting point. The slope tells us rise over run. So whatever number's on top tells us how much it goes up by, and the number on bottom tells us how much to move left or right. Now, slope. Okay, so some of you may have seen this video, and if you haven't seen this video before, it's kind of silly, and you can find it on YouTube, but this is Slope Dude. And Slope Dude tells us if we're heading up the hill, it's really hard, so this is puff, puff, positive. So as you're going up the hill, that's a positive slope. Now, if you're skiing and you come downhill, that's nice. So think nice, negative. So if your line looks like it's going uphill, it's a positive slope. If it looks like it's going downhill, it's a negative slope. Now, if you're skiing and you have to go across this way, that does not look like fun. That would be a lot of hard work. We'll say this is zero fun. Okay, so, and that's a silly way of saying if you had a horizontal line, so if I had a graph here, and I had a line going like this would be where my slope is 0. If instead you have a vertical line that is one going up and down like this, the slope is actually undefined. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, but if you want to jog your memory a little bit, when I taught you this, I taught you the acronyms HOI and VUX. Start thinking about that. I'll bring it back up in just a few minutes when we get to actually a horizontal and vertical line, but that's going to help us to remember slope is 0 with horizontal and slope is undefined with vertical. Okay, so let's practice graphing some lines. So here's the first line we need to graph. So first line we need to graph, it's in slope-intercept form. Look at that. We have y equals mx plus b. It's in the right form. Okay, so we don't need to change it. So we're ready just to graph. So the first thing we do is we start with the y-intercept. Now the y-intercept here is -1. This is where it crosses the y-axis. The y-axis is the one going up and down. This is crossing the y-axis down 1. That's my starting point right there. Okay, so whatever this is, if it's positive, it's above. If it's negative, it's below, and it's wherever it crosses the y-axis is your first point. What we're going to do next is we're going to use this slope. Remember, slope is rise over run. And we have 2 over 3 here. So that means we're going to, from this point, this is our starting point, we're going to rise 2, 1, 2, and then we're going to run 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, notice my slope is positive, so it should be puff, puff, positive going uphill, and it is. And we're in the right pattern here. Now, if you want to go the other way, if you go down 2, you just got to go back 3, and it would be on the same line there. And then you can draw a line through your points. Okay, so make sure it's solve for y, make sure it's in slope-intercept form. If it is, you graph your y-intercept, and then you use your slope to get a couple more points. All right, let's try another one. Okay, is this one in slope-intercept form? Yes, it's in slope-intercept form because we have it solved for y. Y is by itself on one side, and then we have mx plus b. Okay, so if it's in slope-intercept form, we're ready to start graphing. So it's going to start at the y-intercept of 4. This time it's positive, so we're going up 1, 2, 3, 4, and putting a dot. This is our starting point. It's where it crosses the y-axis. This is x, this is y. It's where it crosses the y-axis. Slope. Okay, again, slope is rise over run. Well, if it's a whole number, that's not a fraction. How do I turn a whole number into a fraction? Remember, we put it over 1. So my rise over run, when it's a whole number, my run is just going to be 1. Now notice, it's telling me to rise -2. That means we're actually falling 2 before we go 1 to the right. Fall 2 and then go 1 to the right. That causes us to have a nice, that was not a straight line, nice negative slope, falling to the right, downhill. And then you graph the line. Okay, let's look at this next one. Now, this next one is not solved for y. So remember, there's two steps. If it's not solved for y, I've got to get y by itself. The first thing I want to do is move the term with the x. It's a positive 2x, so we're going to subtract 2x from both sides. All that leaves me with on the left side is negative 4y. On the right side, 8 and negative 2x are not like terms. But remember, I'm shooting for it to look like this with the mx first and then the b. So I'm going to put the negative 2x first and then the plus 8. So first step, you always move whatever term has the x in it. Next, I need to divide away whatever's in front of y. Well, there's a negative 4 there, so everything has to be divided by negative 4. Okay, that leaves me with a y over here, which is what I want. Okay, now if this doesn't divide out nice for the slope, we just got to reduce it. Negative and negative, those cancel out. 2 over 4. My smaller number's on top, so I know I'm going to have a fraction. But what will it reduce to? Well, 2 will go into both of these. 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into 4 twice. So 2 over 4 reduces to 1 over 2. And then 8 divided by negative 4 is negative 2. And now that we have it solved for y, it's in slope-intercept form. We can graph it. Y-intercept negative 2, so we start down 2. Slope is a positive 1 over 2, so up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2, and then we can draw our line. So you look first, make sure it's solved for y. If it's solved for y, go ahead and graph it. If it's not solved for y, solve for y first. Then using the y-intercept, that's your starting point, and then the slope, rise over run, to get your other points. All right, let's head down to this one and look at this one first. So this is a funny one. It says y equals negative 2. This is not in slope-intercept form. But remember, if it only has one variable, that means it's either going to be a vertical or horizontal line. So how do I know which one's which? Okay, this is where Vux and Hoy come back in. Hoy is what's going to help us here. That's the acronym I gave you, the silly acronym. H stands for horizontal. That O is actually a 0. That means the slope is equal to 0. And Y means the equation of a horizontal line is Y equals a number. So if I see Y equals a number, I know I have a horizontal line. Horizontal, think about the horizon. That would be your horizon, back and forth. So it's going to be a horizontal line with a slope of 0. And that means that it's just everywhere that y equals negative 2. So we have a y-intercept of negative 2. Well, the y-intercept of negative 2 would be right here. And a line showing everywhere that y equals negative 2 would just look like this. So if you see you have just y equals a number or just x equals a number, you have just a horizontal or just a vertical slope. So if it's y equals a number, it's horizontal where y equals that number. If it's x equals a number, it's a vertical line. Our acronym here is VUX. Vertical line with an undefined slope. And a y-intercept of, well, it doesn't cross the y-axis. It only crosses the x-axis. So if you have x equals a number, you know it's a vertical line. Vertical is up and down. And some of you may have what's called vertical blinds. Maybe if you have a sliding door, you might have the vertical blinds, and they're called that because they go up and down from top to bottom. Okay, so at x equals 3, well, remember x is here, y is here. So x is 3 right here. That means we're going to have a vertical line like this. So if it's y equals a number, it's going left and right where y equals that number. If it's x equals a number, it's up and down where x equals a number. Okay, real quickly, let's just move backwards here. What if I want to write an equation of line? Well, I just need two things. I just need the y-intercept and I need the slope, and then I can write it just like this. So on this one, it has a y-intercept of 1, 2, 3, 4. So I know this is going to be plus 4 at the end. And then the slope goes in front of x. Well, to get from the first point to the second point, it's rise 1, 2 over 1. So that would be a slope of 2 over 1, or just 2. On this one, we have a y-intercept of 1, and a slope of, well, we got to go down 2 over 1, 2, 3.